Your fingerprints, your face, your Medicare number, your driver's license. Every piece of identification that makes you legally you as an Australian citizen. The Trump administration wants all of it, and they want it now. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is happening right now in negotiations that your own government refuses to even acknowledge exist. Dear viewers, what I'm about to share with you represents one of the most significant sovereignty challenges Australia has faced since federation. And the most disturbing part, Canberra is keeping you completely in the dark about it. Washington, D.C. 2025. The Trump administration issues a quiet demand to every country participating in the visa waiver program. The message was simple: give us direct access to your citizens' biometric databases or lose visa-free travel privileges entirely. 40 countries received this ultimatum. Australia was one of them. The deadline, December 31st, 2026. The consequences of non-compliance. Australians would need to apply for traditional visas, wait months for approvals, and potentially face travel restrictions that haven't existed between our nations since World War II. But here's what makes this different from every previous security arrangement. This isn't about sharing information on suspected terrorists. This isn't about tracking known criminals. This is about handing American agencies, including immigration and customs enforcement, the same ICE currently conducting raids in American cities that have shocked the world, direct access to databases containing every single Australian who has ever traveled internationally, your grandmother who visited Hawaii in 2015, your teenager who did a gap year in California, you reading this right now, wondering if your data is already being prepared for transfer. The answer is almost certainly yes. Let me be absolutely clear about the scope of this demand. According to the Department of Homeland Security's own privacy assessments, the data they're seeking includes surnames, first names, former names, other names, aliases, alternative spellings of names, sex, date and place of birth, current and former nationalities, passport data, numbers from other identity documents, biometric modalities including facial images, and criminal, police, and immigration records. Read that list again. This isn't targeted intelligence sharing. This is a comprehensive digital profile of every Australian citizen that American agencies could access at will. Your driver's license number, your Medicare number, potentially your facial recognition data linked to every piece of identification you've ever held, and who would have access. The arrangement explicitly mentions individuals encountered by law enforcement in a border or immigration context in the United States. That's bureaucratic language for ICE. The same agency that has been conducting mass deportation operations. The same agency facing accusations of human rights violations from international observers. The same agency that detained Australian citizens by mistake during previous administrations. This agency would be able to search Australian databases, not just for people entering America, but for anyone they encounter. An Australian tourist photographed near a protest. An Australian student questioned during a routine traffic stop. An Australian business executive whose name appears in someone else's phone contacts. All of them could have their complete biometric profiles pulled from Australian government servers instantly, without Australian oversight, without Australian approval, without Australians ever being informed. When journalists asked the Albanese government directly about these negotiations, the response was telling. Home Affairs refused to provide any information, stating only that visa requirements and policies are a matter for the countries that issue them. That's not an answer. That's an evasion. Compare this to the European Union's approach. When faced with the same ultimatum, EU officials began formal public consultations in July 2025. Privacy advocates were invited to participate. Biometric security specialists were consulted. Parliamentary debates were scheduled. European citizens were told explicitly that their government was weighing their privacy rights against American security demands. Australia? Nothing. No parliamentary debate. No public consultation. No acknowledgement that negotiations are even occurring. This silence is itself a form of answer. A government confident in its position would defend that position publicly. A government protecting its citizens' interests would explain how those interests are being safeguarded. The Albanese government's refusal to discuss EBSP negotiations suggests they have already conceded to American demands and are simply waiting for an opportune moment to announce fait accompli. This demand doesn't exist in isolation. It represents a pattern of American security policy that has consistently prioritized domestic political concerns over allied sovereignty. In December 2025, the Trump administration began demanding that Australian travelers provide not just biometric information, but social media histories. Every tweet, every Facebook post, every Instagram story potentially reviewed by American officials before you're allowed to step off the plane in Los Angeles. The justification, a single incident in 2021 where a British national took hostages in Texas after being removed from a UK terror watch list. One failure in British intelligence became the pretext for demanding comprehensive surveillance access to hundreds of millions of citizens across 40 allied nations. This is how American security theater operates. An isolated incident becomes a systemic demand. A single failure becomes justification for unprecedented overreach. And allied nations, dependent on American markets and American military partnerships, are expected to simply comply. Australia has historically been among the most compliant. When Washington asked for Australian troops in Iraq, Canberra delivered. When Washington asked for Australian support on China policy, Canberra pivoted overnight. When Washington asked for nuclear submarine technology sharing, Canberra abandoned a $50 billion French contract without hesitation. The question now is whether Canberra will also hand over the biometric keys to 26 million Australian citizens simply because Washington demanded it. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Australia doesn't have to accept this arrangement. The European Union has already demonstrated that pushing back is possible. EU negotiations have extended well past initial American timelines. European officials have demanded guardrails that American negotiators initially rejected. The principle they've established is simple data sharing requires reciprocal obligations and meaningful oversight. Australia could adopt the same position. Canberra could demand that any data sharing be limited to specific individuals under active investigation, not blanket database access. Australia could require that every query be logged, reviewed, and subject to Australian judicial oversight. Australia could insist that data on Australian citizens never be shared with third parties, never be retained beyond specific investigations, never be used for purposes beyond those explicitly agreed. Most importantly, Australia could demand reciprocity. If American agencies want access to Australian databases, Australian agencies should have equivalent access to American databases. If ICE can query an Australian citizen's Medicare number, then Australian Border Force should be able to query American Social Security records. Watch how quickly American enthusiasm for data sharing evaporates when the arrangement flows both ways. This isn't abstract policy. This is personal. Every Australian who has ever traveled internationally has their biometric data held by Home Affairs. Every Australian who holds a passport has their facial recognition profile stored in government databases. Every Australian who has renewed a driver's license or Medicare card in recent years has contributed to the data repository that Washington is now demanding access to. That means you. That means your family. That means every Australian reading these words right now and the protections on that data. Under EBSP, they would effectively disappear at the American border. A DHS official in Texas could access your complete biometric profile with fewer restrictions than an Australian police officer would face domestically. The irony is bitter. Australian governments have spent years debating domestic surveillance powers, with parliamentary committees repeatedly blocking Home Affairs' attempts to create comprehensive biometric databases. The 2019 proposal to turn Home Affairs into a national biometrics hub for security agencies was rejected specifically because politicians recognized the privacy implications. Now, those same protections that Australians fought for domestically may be circumvented entirely through an international agreement negotiated in secret, announced without consultation, and implemented before any parliamentary review is possible. Dear viewers, we are witnessing a fundamental test of Australian sovereignty. The Trump administration has made its position clear. American security priorities override allied privacy concerns. American agencies should have unrestricted access to allied databases. American political objectives justify any demand, regardless of impact on partner nations. The only question remaining is whether Australia accepts this framing. History will remember how Canberra responds. Capitulation will establish a precedent that Australian citizen data is available to any American administration that demands it loudly enough. Resistance will demonstrate that even America's closest allies have boundaries that cannot be crossed. The Albanese government has chosen silence. But silence, in negotiations like these, is itself a form of surrender. 26 million Australians deserve to know what their government is agreeing to in their name. 26 million Australians deserve to understand what data is being shared, with whom, under what restrictions. 26 million Australians deserve the basic respect of being told the truth. Instead, we get bureaucratic non-answers and ministerial evasions. The deadline is December 2026. The negotiations are happening now, and the Australian public remains deliberately, systematically, unconscionably uninformed. That should concern every single one of us. What do you think Australia should do? Should Canberra comply with American demands, or should Australia push back like the European Union? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe Australians deserve transparency about what their government is negotiating in secret, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this story is far from over.